How's it going? My name is Cameron, also known as Venus Theory, and in this video I'm here to show you around one of my favorite effects, PSP N2O. So, what is N2O? N2O is a multi-effects unit that is packed with different effects. There's a bunch of filters, there's distortions, there's reverbs, there's delays, there's a really nice lo-fi effect, and there's even some output limiting algorithms based around the algorithms found in PSP Xenon. So, all of this sounds cool enough. However, the real magic of N2O comes in the routing matrix. So, N2O offers a routing matrix that allows you to set up 4 different effects and route them in any way you would like. So you could create multiple parallel chains, or you could feed different effects back into each other, or a combination thereof. On top of that, you get 4 assignable modulators and 8 different macro knobs, which is absolutely crazy, and this is why this is one of my favorite plugins just to get really creative and weird with processing sounds. So, in today's video, I wanted to show you guys how I like to use N2O to create these big, droning, atmospheric elements for my tracks in only a couple of minutes. So, let's dive in and get started. Alright guys, so like I said, today I'm here to show you how to generate these really cool, complex atmospheric elements for your tracks. So before we dive into it, let's take a listen to the end result. Pretty cool stuff, and this is actually all made using just one little vocal sample. So let's go ahead and just take a listen to the sample that we're going to be using. So I find vocal samples tend to work well just because there's a pretty distinct tone, and there's also kind of some nice breathiness if you use the right sample. Otherwise, anything tonal can work. I've done this with like single guitar hits or like a marimba sample, you know, anything like that, because we're essentially just drowning the sound out and messing around with it in N2O to kind of just change everything about it more or less. So the vocal sample sounds like that, and the first thing I like to do with these sounds is just clean it up a bit. So for that, I grabbed MCQ and the FET presser. So with MCQ, I'm just kind of high passing it and scooping out some of the stuff I don't like, and then adding just a tiny, tiny bit of air up here around 10K. After that, I engaged output saturation and just drove the EQ up just a little bit to add just kind of the tiniest bit of fuzz and grit to the vocal sound, and that's really all that's doing. After that, FET presser, and this is mostly just to kind of squish this vocal sample down and remove the dynamic change between these two parts. Because since we're going to be turning this into a pad type thing and we want to loop it, we want the dynamics to be relatively consistent so there's not this weird, you know, stuttery, chunky effect when it's looping over and over. So pretty quick attack, fairly long release, ratio is pretty high, I guess about 6:1 or so in here. And yeah, like I said, just kind of squishing this down to get a really flat sound. And then that EQ just kind of cleans everything up. This little noisy tail, I'm not really worried about, but if you really wanted to, you could just go ahead and chop that off and maybe add a fade to the start and end of the sample. So from there, we dive into N2O, and this is really where the magic happens. Because you heard the vocal with the EQ and compression applied and it's not doing much, but N2O is really doing all the heavy lifting here. So let's take a look at what I've done. So like I said, N2O is a modular effect, so it's really, really cool because it allows you to create pretty complex routing without having to, you know, have a bunch of groups and channels in your DAW, which is really, really nice. So I've got 4 operators here. Operator 1 is pitch. This is going down an octave. Operator 2 is a reverb. It's on cathedral. Time is at 100%. There's no pre-delay. Damping is at 50% and amount is at 100%. Operator 3 is lo-fi. I've set this to 12 bits and 22,000 hertz for the sample rate. Sometimes I like to go even more lo-fi, so maybe we would divide the main sample rate by 4, so what was that, 11,050. We can get a really nice grungy lo-fi thing going on if we wanted to. And operator 4 is the state variable filter, and this I just kind of like to mess with and get, you know, a nice cutoff point for the sound. So in this case, this is what we're going to end up with. So we might low pass it a bit just to get rid of all that kind of noisy stuff, because we can always reintroduce that later with like really extreme EQs and stuff. So now it comes down to the routing and how this works. So the input is just the signal coming into N2O. is feeding into operator 2. Operator 2 feeds back into 1. 1 feeds into 3. 3 feeds back into 2 and 1. So I'm creating kind of a feedback loop just to really mess this sound up. And then this is going to all feed out through 4. So everything ends up going back into 1. 1 goes to 4. 4 goes out. And that's really all I'm doing with this. So from here, we might add some modulation, which is pretty easy to do. So we could maybe just add slow LFO. And we can go to our matrix. And we'll tie this LFO to the state variable filter cutoff or frequency A. And we'll just move that just a little bit. And we can get a nice kind of subtle modulation to the whole thing. Cool. So in this case, this vocal's already pretty bright, so I'm not going to crush it with that lo-fi all that much, but maybe we could drop this down to like 8 bits instead. And that should give us a nice kind of bass sound to start with. So that filter movement really adds something else. So from here, I added PSP Easy Verb, and I just used Cathedral, and the time I just turned up way far to like 80-90%, mixed in pretty much all the way wet. And this is just really going to drown this sound out. After that, I added the E27 SE. I just really like how this EQ makes things sound. So I just added a bit of drive. We could maybe go ahead and high pass this around like 70 hertz just to be safe, and maybe drive up the output just a hair. 28K switch isn't enabled. Added a bit more air at 17.5K. Boosted a little bit around 4.6K. This is mostly just to make it jump a little more forward, because that's around the range where our ears are really sensitive. And then boosted a little bit at around 120. Not by much. I don't really want to overwhelm it, but you know, just adding that nice deep low end to these pad sounds usually works well. So now I will bounce this out as a sample. So in Cubase or any other DAW, what I did was just create a group and route that group to a new audio track. So from here, just to make sure that the tone and everything is consistent, I would just use Vary Audio, which is just tuning. And then we could just go ahead and reanalyze this because I've already done it. But what I would do is just flatten this out to one note. So we see this is G#3. We'll just quantize the pitch to make it really flat. Maybe mess with the formants a little. And we get something like this. Cool, that sounds pretty neat. So from here, we could just record this because this is routing to this group and this group routes to this audio track. So we'll just record the sample. All right, so now we can just open any sampler we would like. I'm just going to use the built-in sampler track in Cubase. We'll drag our sample in, and we know this was at G#3. There we go, and we'll go ahead and set the sample start and endpoints. Add a nice fade in, something about like so, and we'll set up looping to be continuous. There we go, crossfade our loop just a little bit. And then from here, you know, we can mess with other things like, you know, adding filters. We could add some filter drive, and we'll have a pad sound that we can mess with. So one of the things with this is we don't really have that nice big reverb tail. So from here, we could just add another easy verb or whatever you would like, maybe just like a really big plate reverb. And that will really drown this out in a nice way. One of the other things I really like to do sometimes is actually mix Saturator right on the end of all of this, usually on like the valve or tape modes. And just using a little bit of this just at the very end after the big reverb can really give it a nice crunch. And, you know, doing things like that, like really low notes, can provide some super interesting atmospheric elements for your next track. Other than that, one of the other cool things you can always try is just opening up another instance of N2O on the completed sound, and we could just maybe grab one of these presets and mix it in pretty low, just to add a bit more movement and character to the pad. or automate the mix over time. And you can get these absolutely insane sounds that can really fill out your mix or act as a super, super cool intro or breakdown element, whatever you would like to do with it. And I think this is a great way to make these types of sounds. And that's it for this video. So if you want to check out N2O for yourself, you can find it today at pspaudioware.com.